That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and I am joined by Jennifer Say, who is the founder and CEO of XXXY Athletics. And for those of you who are watching, you can see my big head. You can see that most of it is covered up by a really cool hat that just happens to be, just a complete coincidence, XXXY Athletics. So Jen, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Lou. Your hat looks good.
Thanks. Well, I guess that's a good place to jump off. And, what is XXXY Athletics and how did it come about?
Yeah, it is athletic apparel brand. We're the only athletic clothing brand to stand up for the protection of women's sports and spaces. It came about because, let's see if I can do the short version. It's sort of the culmination of everything I've ever done in my entire life. And I feel like almost inevitable as to kind of where I'm landing right now and leading this brand. I was an elite gymnast as a child. So, background as an athlete, I was the 86 national champion and certainly a beneficiary of Title IX because I started competing in the 70s just after Title IX passed, which means I'm quite old, but there you have it. I went on to write a book 20 years after I left the sport that was, the first person account exposing the abuse in the sport, the emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, which everyone is now aware of. And it was very controversial at the time. It was 2008. At the time I wrote that book, I was working at Levi's. I worked there 23 years and ended up as the brand president for 2 years at the end of my tenure, and sort of longstanding experience in the fashion biz and love branding and love using is the wrong word, leveraging brands to influence culture, inform culture. And so in the last couple of years, I was thinking about what do I do next? And this just sort of seemed like the inevitable answer. I love the fashion business. I'm an athlete. I'm very concerned about the erosion of Title IX and the recent rewrite of Title IX. So I figured, why not start a brand? This is how I can contribute in a positive way to that conversation about protecting women's sports.
Yeah, and when it comes to Title IX, I hear it. I hear Title IX a lot. Yeah. What is Title IX, and how did it come about, and what was it? What was its original purpose?
Yeah, so it was a law that was passed in 1972, and the real sort of overarching purpose was to ensure equality within education for girls and women. At the time it passed, for instance, in colleges, there were certain majors that girls and women, I should say, in college couldn't even major in because they were considered sort of male fields. In elementary schools, there were activities girls could not participate in. There was no investment in women's sports at the college level. There really weren't any scholarships. So, the most well-known part of Title IX is the part about athletics, but it really was a much broader law about education and protecting females' sex-based rights and equality to further equality for girls and women within the education system. Now, it is most famous for and most known for the sports piece of it. And it is responsible, I would argue, for increasing girls and women participation in sports. I mean, I don't even know the number. It's like, hundreds fold. There just weren't that many. I started gymnastics in 1974. There weren't soccer clubs or baseball teams or volleyball teams for girls. There was gymnastics and cheerleading and dance, basically. And gymnastics was just starting to grow. So now anything my daughter wants to do, she can do. She can do all the same sports, play all the same sports, and have the same opportunities that my 3 sons have. And that is because of Title IX. Now, it was recently rewritten by the Department of Education. And by recently, I mean 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And it replaces the idea of sex-based rights, which is the whole point of Title IX, with gender identity. It literally eliminates sex-based protections for girls and women.
So, I remember seeing a clip of Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz is one of those politicians where he obviously gets a lot of a lot of hate, a lot of criticism. But this clip in particular seemed to show him in a very reasonable light. And there was some hearing, and he just asked the questions like, well, why do we have women's sports? Why, if the idea is that there is no difference between men and women, then there would be no reason to separate the sports. Right.
Which is, that's sort of my whole thing here is like there's a lie that underpins all of this. By all of this, I very specifically mean allowing male-bodied, trans-identified athletes to compete in women's sports. They have a physical advantage. They're bigger, stronger, all these things. The lie that sits under that is there is no difference. And some people will actually say that. There's no evidence that that males have an advantage over women or females in sport, which is a lie. There's plenty of evidence. But if you follow that lie through to its conclusion, you get to exactly what you are saying and what Ted Cruz is saying, which is we don't need any categories. We don't need sex-based categories. Let's just have one big open category. And the problem with that is girls and women won't make any teams. Girls and women will know that it's a losing battle. They won't even try to play. They won't be eligible for scholarships or Olympic team berths or NCAA wins or anything. And so for me, this is so central and important because it would eliminate all of those gains within education and sports specifically. And it's a lie. I mean, that's the other thing, Lou. It's just a lie. Like I cannot carry a lie forward, because of ideology. So I think it's really important we stand up for the truth in this case.
Yeah, even in, and I'm not I don't know a lot about gymnastics, but I do know that the men and women in gymnastics compete in different things too. Like there are different aspects of the sports. Like I think men do like parallel bars versus uneven. Yeah. Can you just just give us like a breakdown of
what they're totally different sports. They're totally different sports. I mean, arguably men's and women's sports categories in any sport are different. There's a famous quote from Serena Williams a few years ago, which I don't think she would say now. I think she was on the Jimmy Kimmel show where she says men's and women's tennis are two different sports. And she's talking about a male tennis champion whose name I don't remember at the moment, but she's like, I would lose every set. Like I couldn't get a point off of him. I love women's tennis. I want to play women's tennis. These are different sports. The men's tennis, they're stronger, more power, all these things. So that's literally a sport with the same rules. And she's saying that they're different sports. In gymnastics, they're literally different sports. So men do 6 events, women do 4. There's 2 in common, floor and vault, but even those are quite different. The men's floor exercise, they do more tumbling runs. They have no music. There's no dance. It's, but in men's, they do the rings, the rings where they do like the Iron Cross. I was the best gymnast in the country. I couldn't do an Iron Cross. Like the men's events are tailored around upper body strength, essentially. And female gymnasts are really strong. I mean, it's an incredible sport. They're strong, flexible, fast, all of these things. And they can't do rings. So, I thought a lot about this one. Like, would it matter if men were allowed to compete in women's gymnastics? Would that matter? Because it's a different sport. And essentially the events are tailored to women's strengths. But I've actually seen online of late men participating in women's gymnastics. And this can't happen. Like they can do harder tricks. They can do them more easily. They can leverage that strength in the women's events as well. And there's a reason they're separate and they need to remain separate. Yeah.
Out of all the sports, like what is there a sport that has been safe from, this, I don't know, gender creep, I would call it, because I get, there might be videos of like dudes doing like, female, female games of gymnastics, but like, as far as them actually competing, has it hit
that has not happened. Although the official policy of USA Gymnastics is that trans-identified males can compete in women's. And so that's their official policy.
It is
of the governing body. And each individual sport within the Olympic movement has its own governing body, and they all report into the USOC, who has not made any sort of official declaration on the rules. And so many sports, boxing, for instance, which is like the worst example of a sport that should allow trans males in, they've officially stated that trans-identified male athletes can compete within the USA boxing arena. Obviously very dangerous.
Yeah. And, I wonder what, what do you even have? Man, what do you have to do? Like, so it's basically like open season. Like a lot of the governing bodies are saying, like, yeah, come on in. We're welcoming you in here. Do the trans athletes, do they have to prove anything? Like, do they have to prove like, oh, here are my, I've been on this hormone for however long and all that. What do they have to do? Like, how do you prove like, okay, I don't have that unfair of an advantage?
Right. They all have different rules right now, which is why we need, a broad-based, very simple rule, which is if you were born male, you compete in the men's category, or make that men's category an open category so anyone can compete in it. And if you were born female, we're going to protect women's sports, and only those born female can compete. So every sport is making up these really bizarre, Byzantine, like crazy rules. Like, I think in boxing, the rule is, and forgive me if I get this wrong, male-bodied athletes can compete in women's, but only post-op. So only if they've gone through the surgery. But,
wow.
But there is an instance within MMA fighting, of which I know almost nothing about, back in 2013 or 14, where a biological male was in the ring with a female and fractured her skull and broke her orbital bone. And that woman had to go to the hospital and have 7 staples placed in her head. This is an athlete who had surgically transitioned. That doesn't change the fact that biology was still on his side. He had gone through male puberty. It's just like, I don't even want to engage in the minutia of these like Byzantine rules. Like, there's women's sports for a reason. There are, the NAIA, which is a governing body for like intramural athletics at the college level, and club sports at the college level, they just made the decision, which I think is the right one, to say the women's category is for biological females only. The men's category is open. Anyone can participate. Like, done. No rules about, we're going to test your testosterone, or 1.5 years after you start testosterone, estrogen therapy, you can't. They just said, period. These are the rules. And men's is open. No one's saying anyone can't compete. Women can even compete in the men's if they choose to. But it's a choice. And I think the NAIA ruling is correct, and that the NCAA and the U.S. Olympic Committee should follow suit. But we're a long way from that. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of, critics on the other side saying like, this is such a small problem that affects such a minority of people. So like, what's the big deal? But on the same, if you want to go down that route, then it works the other way around too. If it's such a minority, then okay, well then they don't have to be competing.
Right. Well, here's what I would say to that.
Yeah.
That's false. It affects 50% of the population, women, who deserve their own sports and spaces. So it's not a small minority. It's a large minority. No one is banning anyone participate in the category of your biology, or create a third category that is open. It may be small right now. I could cite 600 instances. An organization called Our Bodies, Our Sports keeps a running list of the instances of women's prize money, trophies, team births, endorsement deals being taken away and being given to a trans-identified male. I don't think 600 is nothing. And that 600 is just in the last couple of years. And it's rapidly, accelerating, because we've seen, and I'm not going to get into this, but we've seen the sort of transitioning of young people happening at a faster and faster clip in the last 3 to 5 years. So, it may be a small percentage of the population, but again, no one is saying you can't compete. Just compete in the open category, and it affects all women. Beyond sports, women deserve privacy. Women deserve to feel comfortable in the locker room and, be with other women. They deserve safety. I mean, not very many people talk about the safety issue, and it's not just sort of full contact or combat sports like boxing or taekwondo, but sports like volleyball and basketball. There have been serious injuries already of young women playing against males, essentially. Why don't we deserve safety in sports?
Yeah.
These sports are already very dangerous. Why should we escalate the danger? It doesn't seem fair.
Have you ever had the opportunity to talk to any of like the trans competitors? Because I think, one of the goals of sport is to, test yourself, put yourself, to be the best that you can against the best competition that you could put yourself against. And I'm just wondering, just from like a competitor standpoint, like if you're a dude and you're kind of middle of the pack in, say, like track, and then you go and you just start whipping girls' asses, on track and field. I mean,
you feel good about yourself.
Yeah. Like my 4-year-old, he's just started T-ball. And, I watch these guys play and I'm like, I could get in there and destroy these. I would just totally light them up. But, thankfully it would be unfair. And the other dads are keeping me in check and keeping me on the sideline, even though I have my cleats on, I'm ready to get in there, coach.
Totally. There's categories and classes for all sorts of things. There's weight class categories in, strength competitions and boxing. I mean, sure, a heavyweight could crush a welterweight, right? But we don't do that. And it's just so clear to me that there's this lie underneath of it all. The other thing I was going to say, in addition to the point that I made about 50% of the population being impacted, is, for me, what really gets me is I can't really think of a more fundamental, essential truth than males and females are different, and that there are two biological sexes. This has been known and accepted since the beginning of time. And now we are being told, with no proof, that sex is a spectrum. There aren't two sexes. There's a gazillion sexes, and you are what you say you are. With no proof. I don't know. Did somebody prove this? Is there a Nobel Prize I missed? I don't even understand what's happening. And so, to me, participating in this ideological thing is agreeing to lie. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to do that. And I think that's really dangerous. I think when we agree to lie because of ideology, all sorts of really dangerous things can happen. The example I use, which I think doesn't kind of light people up and maybe helps them understand a little, when I first spoke out about the abuse in gymnastics, there was an ideology at play. You weren't supposed to criticize male coaches who were, training champions. The 1984 Olympic team coach was a pedophile. We all knew it. Everybody knew it.
Which guy?
His name is Don Peters. And he was one of the most respected coaches in the country, in the world. He was known for his, he was a technician, but he was a pedophile. But you weren't allowed to say it. You weren't supposed to say it. You were supposed to protect his reputation because he was a great coach. Well, if we do that, really bad things happen. Like, he continues to rape and molest young girls. Well, I wrote about it in my book. It took 4 years for the sport to ban him after that. But this is what I mean when I say, if we consent to lies, then all manner of terrible things can happen. And so I won't consent to this lie that there is no difference between men and women. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And on that too, I've seen some athletes come out as non-binary, which I think they basically shouldn't be allowed to compete then, right? Because there's no shouldn't they? Isn't that maybe that's a way of early retirement? It's sort of all right, I'm done competing.
Go in the open category. We can call the open category the non-binary category.
Yeah, the open one.
The uncommitted, non-committal.
So with gymnastics, you were competing. Were you competing against the Soviets when you were? Mm-hmm. You were thinking, what was that like? You were competing against the Soviets and East Germany, and I mean, we're talking about a lot about hormones and stuff, and man, there was a lot of it in the 70s. Shit they were giving those kids.
Yes, I went to Moscow in 1985 for the first ever Goodwill Games, which was this Rogue style Olympics competition that was created by Ted Turner in the wake of the Olympic boycotts. I don't know if you remember, but in 1980, the United States boycotted the Olympics, which were in Moscow. And then in 1984, the Russians boycotted the Olympics, which were in Los Angeles, as sort of payback. So there was all this like politics involved in the Olympics. And Ted Turner said, well, you know what? These athletes have nothing to do with these global conflicts, these international conflicts. They should be able to come together and compete. So he created the Goodwill Games. And I went to the first one. I don't even know if it exists anymore, but I went to the first one in Moscow and competed against the Russians, who were by far the best gymnasts in the world at the time, like just crushed everyone. Now the US is the best in the world by a long shot. But at the time, and it had been for 2-3 decades, the Russians were by far the best. But you're right, in the 70s, there were quite a few scandals, Russians, East Germans, women taking testosterone, not just in gymnastics, but in swimming. I think most notably, there were East German swimmers. They do, I mean, every national and international competition that is within the kind of Olympic movement, you're tested, not just for any sort of performance enhancing drug or non-performance enhancing. I mean, we saw the sprinter who was, not allowed to compete in the Olympics for marijuana, which I would argue is not performance enhancing at all.
It's probably going to affect your performance. It's probably for the worse, right?
I would say if you can win when you're smoking weed, you're like superhuman. I mean, it's known for its like inducement of laziness, right?
Or what's the? Well, I guess it depends what strain you get. I had a friend of mine. This was years ago. It was probably like 10 years ago, and we smoked a joint, and I basically melted into her couch, and then she was up like a squirrel running back.
So I guess it depends on your personality, but there's a Romanian gymnast, I think the year was 2000, the 2000 Olympics, who won gold, and it was taken from her because her blood tests tested positive for cold medicine. Again, I would argue cold medicine is not performance enhancing. So there are tests, and obviously testosterone is not permitted. They test for blood doping as well, which, came to be known through like Lance Armstrong. So I don't understand why it would be acceptable to have natural, testosterone because you're a male. You would still retain that advantage. But then again, they try to make these like very complicated rules that say, well, if you've taken estrogen for 2 years and your testosterone levels, have come way down, then it is fair. But again, gone through male puberty, bigger, stronger, lung capacity greater, all of it. It's like you cannot really shirk those male advantages. They don't go away.
Yeah, a while back, some years ago, I made a sketch that is basically saying that, if trans athletes are allowed to compete, or at least, trans women are allowed to compete, it's going to really mess things up for gamblers, because it's like, okay, I'm just going to bet the dude every single time. And then, and we got to think about, the poor degenerate gamblers out there trying to make money off of these events.
To go back to your earlier point though, I don't, in many instances, I think one of the most damning kind of facts is these people who had competed as men, Will Thomas, which is Leah Thomas before he became Leah, they're sort of middling level athletes. He was ranked between 400 and 500 in his events in swimming in the country, which isn't bad. I mean, is it terrible to be 400th at something in the whole country? It's pretty good. But in one season, he went from being sort of mid 400s to top 5 in his events as a woman. That doesn't happen from hard training.
No,
it's purely the result of male physical advantage. It just is. It's being a male is the single biggest determinant of athletic performance. And what annoys me to no end is people will say, yeah, well, he still didn't win. Well, that's not really the point. Not every guy who takes steroids is going to become, the world's powerlifting champion. Mm-hmm. But he will dramatically improve his performance in an unnatural fashion. There's a lot of baseball players that took steroids that weren't, what's his name? Barry Bonds.
Yeah, or McGuire or.
Yeah, I'm sure plenty more took steroids. They didn't necessarily become McGuire or Bonds, but they did dramatically improve.
Yeah, and I think there are, I think it would have been a really good move on his part if, he quote unquote transitioned, but continued to race as a male against male competition. Because I forget the name, but there's a mixed martial arts fighter who's trans, male to female, and who continues to fight men. And he's like, yeah, it would be grossly unfair for me to get in there and fight other like 135-pound women. He's like, I would, completely murder them. So,
which is what happened back in 2013 in the case of Fallon Fox. And you don't really see the issue in reverse. Oftentimes females transitioning to male continue to compete in the female category.
Yeah. Well, I saw a tweet not too long ago where it was like a 75-year-old, I believe, Asian woman who ran like a marathon, and she, beat all the other women in her age bracket, and she would have beaten the men in her age bracket by like 10 minutes or something like that. And they were like, see, women can still compete. It's like, okay, how many men over the age of 75 are still alive, let alone running marathons, versus this woman who could be a natural freak,
Right. Well, that's the thing, is because people are like, well, people already have all kinds of different advantages. Michael Phelps is, I don't want to say a freak of nature. His body is built to swim. His wingspan. His
legs are this big. His
wingspan's like this. His shoulders are broad. He's lean. I don't even know how tall. And add to that, he probably works harder than any other swimmer or did at his best, and he overcomes adversity, and he has a special talent. I mean, I would say the same about Simone Biles in gymnastics. I don't know if you know who she is, the world's best gymnast. I mean, she's under 5 feet tall. She's stronger. I mean, it's like any human being,
per cubic inch. Yeah,
exactly. So, and she's a female. She already has all of this advantage. Like, that does happen within the natural parameters, and we can allow for that. That's the point. We want to see those sorts of people with this incredible advantage soar to heights we couldn't have imagined. But I don't think she should be allowed to take steroids to make herself even better. It's within the sort of parameters of what occurs naturally. And so it just, and there are people who will say, well, fairness doesn't matter. What matters more is inclusion. Well, fairness does matter, and safety matters. And Title IX was all about equality of opportunity for girls and women. And so I would say, F you, fairness does matter. It does.
Yeah. Do you still teach gymnastics?
No, not really. I mean, my daughter plays at gymnastics, so I try to help her out and show her stuff now and again.
Yeah, because something that I found with all the I don't even know. Yeah, I guess this would be like culture war stuff, but it has, real, concrete, sorry, my brain is just farting right now. It's a culture war thing that has real implications, for people, especially people who are, competing for scholarships and stuff like that. But I feel like a lot of these, these conversations take away from what should be, positive conversations about sport, especially people who are excelling and excellent in it, where it's sort of like, for all the, we should be talking about Simone Biles a lot more than talking about, people transitioning, trying to get into sports, and like sort of looking at her and being like, how do you make more Simone Biles? How do you make more phenoms? Or where is the sport of gymnastics going to be 20 years from now? If this is where it is, today.
The issue the broader issue that I care about is, how do we get more girls involved in sports? Right. Participation in sports has so many benefits for girls. They have better self-esteem, less anxiety, better body image, more likely to graduate high school, less likely to get pregnant in high school. Like, the benefits go on and on. So how do we enable more female children to participate in sports, and do so, in a safe and nurturing environment, so that these kids can get out of sport all that it can and should offer? I competed in an environment that was not safe and nurturing, that was incredibly cruel and abusive. I'm still very committed to cleaning up sports, and cleaning up the abusive emotional, physical, and sexual abuse that happens in sport, that's still very much a problem. There's an organization called Safe Sport, which was created in the wake of Larry Nassar. They literally, now that it exists, this is a place where you can report coach abuse. They're like 5 years behind. They have so many investigations happening that they cannot keep up with them. That is a good thing. I would like to see, it's not a good thing they have so many they can't keep up. It's a good thing we have Safe Sport. I would like to see that better funded so they could actually keep up with these investigations. So I want to see more girls participate in sport. And I think this issue, which may seem like a sidebar issue, I think it diminishes or will ultimately girls' willingness to participate in sport. Because if you know you don't have a fair chance, why would you? I wouldn't. But it's part of this larger issue of creating safe spaces and opportunities for girls to compete in sport. I would also like to see, look, sports are expensive. Even T-ball, you got to buy the equipment. There's team dues when your kid gets better. My son's 9. He's on a traveling soccer team. There's a lot of people that can't afford that. I would like to help fund scholarships for those kids to be able to do that because of the benefits. So there's a lot of issues I think our brand can touch on. This one is the most kind of culture worry to use your at the moment, but I also think really, really important to contend with.
Yeah. Well, what about, there was a recent college team, track and field. The girls walked off the field, the ring or whatever, where they throw the shot put in protest of having to go up against a male on the other.
Those were middle schoolers, actually.
Oh, it was middle school. Oh, yeah. Wow.
That was a middle school in West Virginia. And this is interesting because I think they knew that there was, they had seen that there was this male, 13-year-old, I believe, who was competing in the shot put in their state, and they knew it was coming, and so they prepared for it. I think a lot of folks in the moment don't know what to do, and they just compete, and then they accept the loss. Riley Gaines talks quite a bit about that in her 2022 NCAA competition where she tied with Leah Thomas. But those girls knew, and they planned, and they got 5. They tried to get more, but they got 5, which is a lot. They stepped up to I don't know anything about the shot put, but the ring where you throw the shot put from. They kind of took the position and they turned and walked off. And it did create quite a stir. But you know what happened? Those 5 girls are now banned from competing.
Wow.
That's what the state decided to do.
Man, what's ultimately gonna break this shit? Is it gonna be just lawsuits coming in?
I think there's a couple things. Yes, I think lawsuits, and there is a lawsuit against the NCAA right now that's led by Icons Women, a nonprofit, and Riley Gaines is one of the women suing the NCAA. So yes, I think that will make a difference. I actually think, and I know it's sad and hard to do, I think we need more girls to do what those shot putters did. And, I've said this publicly many times, and people yell at me that they shouldn't have to do that. The adults need to do something, but the adults aren't doing anything. Right. And change happens from the ground up. And, within gymnastics, change did not start to happen until the athletes said, this is abusive coaching. We are not going to take it anymore. And they basically ended up rising up, athletes from around the world, and having the federation heads fired and having someone new come in to create new rules and new boundaries, et cetera. So, and there is sacrifice involved. The women who came forward to put Larry Nassar in prison, those women sacrificed a lot. I mean, one of them, the most prominent, Rachel Denhollander, she lost her church, she lost her community, she lost almost everything to do what was the right thing. So oftentimes sacrifice is required, I think, to do the right, to do the right thing and prompt change. And so I think I would like to see a movement of girls refusing to compete.
Yeah. And I know there was a documentary about that. I haven't had the chance to watch, or I've had the chance. I haven't watched it. Stuff like that kind of is a little, I don't know. It's a little tough for me to
It's
to
a little sad, but you should watch it. It ends on a triumphant note. The Athlete A, I think, is the documentary you're talking about, which I produced. Yeah. It's really, it's good if I do say so myself.
Yeah. As far as like people turning on the athletes who come forward, it's like, man, like what, I don't know. the nerve on people to, what are you upset about? Like, how dare you, be sexually assaulted and speak out against it? I mean,
yeah. I mean, for many years before Me Too and the Nassar stuff, the story broke before Me Too. The story broke in 2016. The FBI, I think you probably saw, just paid out a massive settlement to the athletes who had reported abuse between 2015 and 2016, and the FBI did not act on it. So, hundreds of millions of dollars they just paid out. There was a time where you did not only not have to believe all women, you didn't even have to listen to them. And so, it was a time-worn strategy to criticize women who dared to speak up about sexual assault, to call them sluts and whores and what were you wearing and all that garbage. So that's the kind of stuff these women faced. This was 2015, 2016.
Yeah. And, on this topic, it seems like when women do speak up, if it is someone like Riley Gaines, who, is affiliated with the XXXY Athletics, she's, all over the, your website and stuff, the hate that comes their way is pretty significant. Like I've even, the one thing that I've been seeing lately is trolls coming out and posting a picture of Riley Gaines in a bikini with with her fucking 8-pack, which is just, unreal, saying, yeah, exactly. She's a man. She's a, trans man. It's like
stupid. Yeah, it's so stupid. These people don't know what athletes look like. I mean, when I was coming up, we were all anorexic, so that's like a different thing, but we all had 8-packs too. Of course, I had never seen, because all my friends were gymnasts too. Like I'd never seen someone without one. I remember seeing a young woman with a normal stomach and thinking, what's wrong with her? We just all were yoked.
Is she okay? She must be, disabled.
There's something wrong with her. Yeah. They attack your looks. I get attacked for that all the time. Old, ugly, whatever. But the other problem is our team can't really come together on this. So, of late I get attacked for being a, late comer. You didn't really stand up in this area. It's like, come on, guys. Like I've been standing up for the safety and protection of female athletes since 2008. I've been dragged across the internet for almost 20 years. And even if I hadn't, we need to welcome everyone that comes on over. I mean, it's sort of the same COVID. I sort of met you, I think, the first time around that issue, and I stood up for open schools during COVID. And there's some people that want to kind of retain this like purity test. Like, did you stand up against lockdowns from day one? If you didn't, then you can't join our team. And it's like, well, then we're going to lose.
Right.
I mean, it's so stupid. We need more people.
Yeah. Yeah. We could definitely, talk about, the lockdown stuff, because I think there's a lot of discussion about cancel culture and what being canceled means. But you're somebody who actually has like 2 legitimate cancellations that you can actually point to, and all of it because you have had the nerve to speak up and just say just express reality. So.
Yeah. Look, the people who say cancel culture isn't real, I mean, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. First of all, you don't even hear from all the people that were canceled that did not recover. We don't know about them. There's a lot of them. There are high-profile instances of people being canceled, not recovering. There are high-profile instances of people being canceled and finding another way to keep going. They find another way. But it's terrible regardless. And it's real. The only people saying it's not real are the ones that do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. The ones who jump on the mob.
They're invested in it. Yeah, they're invested in it. But, to your point, I mean, the other argument, I thought this is what you were going to say when you brought up Riley and some of the critics. Some of her critics I've noticed, and I noticed this because I got this when I spoke out about abuse in gymnastics. Some of her critics are like, well, she was not a good swimmer anyway. Why are you trying?
That was Keith Olbermann. Keith Olbermann said, like, look, you sucked at swimming. Get over it.
She was 5th at the NCAAs. What have you ever been 5th at in the whole country in your whole life, Keith Olbermann? And he's not the only one. Lots of people say it. It's like, do these people, I got that one kind of lights me on fire, because when I spoke about abuse in gymnastics, and I was the national champion, I was a 7-time national team member, people were like, yeah, you were a shitty gymnast. Okay, so what? What if I was the worst gymnast ever? Does that mean my coach should get to abuse me?
Right.
It's so stupid. And I'm sorry. And I fully admit that I may be the worst national champion that ever was a national champion. That is very possible. It has nothing to do with the matter. But you people arguing that we sucked at what we do or did, they can't even fathom the work and the commitment it takes to be the top 100 in the country in anything, let alone 5th, which is what Riley was. It's like, oh, they make me so mad. It's it's the argument about looks, you were shitty, you sucked anyway, the name calling, all those sort of ad hominem attacks. And Riley's really good at this. You just have to let it roll off your back, because those sorts of attacks are the purview of people with no argument.
Yeah. And the misogyny just kind of pokes out too, because it's like, oh, if the only comeback you have against this athlete who's, is that she's ugly. Oh, she's not really a man. She's not really a woman, but which is just funny too, like saying, oh, she's a man. It's like, well, on their side of it, isn't that a compliment?
Right.
Like I don't know.
None of it makes sense. There's so much illogic at the heart of all of this. I mean, if sex is non-binary, then why do you need to switch sexes?
Yeah.
If it's not binary, then just be like a guy who dresses up like a woman. Like, who cares? It's fine. No one cares. There's so many just logical fallacies at the heart of this whole movement that I think it can't last. But I think we're a really long way from ending it. I think Europe is way ahead of us in this regard. I don't know if you read at all about the Cass review out of the UK, but basically it was this report done by a pediatrician in UK where she looked at all of the studies and the evidence around so-called gender-affirming care for minors. And she said, there's no evidence that this is helpful. She didn't say there's evidence that it's harmful, but she said there is no evidence. This helps at all ease any of the sort of distress that these young people are feeling. And, if you believe first do no harm, then you would argue if there's no evidence, we should not pursue this. And the UK and many other European countries have decided to kind of do a big pause on all the gender affirming care, hormones and puberty blockers and surgeries for minors while they study it more. But the US is not there. And as it pertains to sport, the Title IX rewrite is just dangerous. Yeah. I mean, they rewrote 50 years of law, just smuggled it in. They didn't legislate it. They just had the Department of Education write it and kind of like stick it out there on a Friday afternoon when they wouldn't have to do a press conference and think we wouldn't notice.
Yeah. And what is that going to look like? Well, I guess, we have an election coming up, so, it can go either
arguably,
way.
if there was a new Department of Ed, they could rewrite it back. You don't have to rewrite it. You just say rescinding. I mean, there's other problems with the rewrite besides what I just described, that there is no protection for sex. There's only protection for gender identity. The other issues are there's compelled speech. And, if you refused as a student or a team to acknowledge a person's gender identity, that would be considered sexual harassment or gender identity harassment. If you are accused of harassment or sexual assault or abuse in any way, there is no due process for you. It's just a bureaucrat who would decide if you were guilty or not and possibly expel you or suspend you. So even the ACLU has come out against that last piece, the no due process. So there's many problems with this rewrite, not the least of which is they just rewrote it without legislating it, which to me is a huge problem. That's not how we pass laws in this country.
Yeah. What have you found, I guess, when it comes to, relationships with, friends and that sort of thing? Have you lost friends over all this stuff?
Pretty much all of them.
Pretty much all.
There's a few that have kind of stood by me. Some very notable ones. My closest friend from college, it's a gay guy, actually. He's very much, even if we don't agree on everything, he's very much in the camp of, I support you, I love you, I know the person that you are. He's about the only one.
Oh, well,
Have you?
I've definitely lost people. Over the years, and it was funny. Like I used to. How would I put it? Well, I guess recently I went to a book event, and afterwards, a group of us got dinner, and I had known like one of the people, and so it was like a new group of people there, and we were having just such a great time, like talking about all different controversial subjects.
Yeah.
And the woman next to me who I just met said something about taxation, right? And let's just say it was something that I disagreed with vehemently, right? And sure, I had an opportunity there to really have a debate, but you know what? I didn't give a fuck. Who cares? Like, she thinks this. She thinks this about taxation. I don't. We're having a great time as a group. Let's just enjoy. I hadn't been out in a while. It was fantastic. The ability to split,
to just agree to disagree on some things like that. That's the problem. Is and most of my fractured friendships and relationships happened during COVID because I had the audacity to think that public schools should open, especially when private schools were open. And I literally have friends who were sending their kids to open private school, who won't talk to me because of the stance I'd taken. It's like, I don't know. You're going to come at me. You think I'm an awful person. Well, I kind of think you're a hypocrite. You sent your own kid. I don't care though. We've known each other 30 years. Like, why can't we just kind of get past this one? But, between COVID, which was the most insane time ever in the world, right? And you were on one side or the other, and nobody was on my side, basically, except my husband, thank goodness. And then this issue around gender ideology. And now, again, we have another issue in terms of the war in Israel, and that's caused, I think, further fractures. And it's interesting, even within my own sort of coterie and friends I did make during COVID, right on October 8th, and I'm sure you've observed this as well, within the anti-lockdowners and COVID dissenters, there's a very conspiratorial kind of segment of that group. And that was never my kind of nature, but I get it. Like, we can come together on what we agree on. Literally October 8th, they were the people who were like, it's the Jews, like the most conspiratorial people always think it's the Jews, of which I am one. So, now there's even, fractures within fractured communities, I think, because of this war.
Yeah. Yeah. I had, it was, I guess, I had like a big break with a lot of people during the, I don't know if you remember the Covington High School conspiracy. So it was a bunch of kids who went to Catholic school called Covington. They were in Washington, D.C. for like a pro-life event. A bunch of the boys bought "Make America Great Again" hats, red hats, and they walked away from the parade. I don't know, the march or whatever you call it, and then they had an incident with a Native American elder named Nathan Phillips, and most people, if they remember that event, will just remember probably like a still image of the kid Nicholas Sandman with a smirk on his face when he has like this, old Native American dude in his face. And the kid was accused of being a racist and, just the worst things that you could possibly, call somebody. And I remember at the time and this was before I had seen like all the footage and stuff and everything that led up to it. And I had said, look, even if everything that you're saying about this kid is true, he's still a kid. And I really don't want to ruin this kid's life over this. And man, the amount of people who basically, they were, if they could sacrifice this kid, they would do it.
Remember the kid recently with the face paint? Do you remember that?
Yeah. With Deadspin. Yeah. And that one, it was a 9-year-old Chiefs fan.
Yeah, and they showed one side of his face, which was black. I think the other side was red. I don't know anything about the Chiefs. right?
So a reporter for Deadspin took a picture of this kid, this 9-year-old Chiefs fan, and half of his face was painted in black, the other half was red, and he only showed the part that was painted in black and accused this kid of doing blackface and also of cultural appropriation of Native American culture.
He also is Native American.
Yeah.
Like his grandfather is an important figure in whatever their tribe is. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's it's an example of men, they will go after children. They will go
Absolutely. Well, the whole cultural appropriation thing too. I mean, I'm sorry, aren't men appropriating women's culture when they dress up like us and insist on being allowed in our sports and spaces? And I don't really understand why people aren't accusing the college campus protesters of cultural appropriation with their keffiyehs and everything.
I don't know if you read it, but my friend Brendan O'Neill, he's from a Spiked magazine. He has a piece, I think it's in like in Australian paper, about how the keffiyeh is, these like the same people who would be shouting about cultural appropriation are the same ones donning this stuff.
It's like it's okay when they do it, but we know that it's okay when they do it. Like that's the rule. And if you do it and they don't agree with you, then you're racist or whatever. There's a whole list of things they'll call you, which basically amount to being a bigot. It was the same during COVID. I was called a racist repeatedly for advocating for open schools. How does that equate to racism, you might ask? Well, apparently the argument was, public schools are disproportionately populated by Black children, so I don't care if Black children die. When in fact, the exact opposite is true. The kids that were harmed the most were Black children, were poor children, were Latino children who do disproportionately attend public schools. In my city that I lived in at the time, San Francisco, 60% of the student population in San Francisco are low income or poverty, as indicated by this sort of free lunch and all of that. Like these are the kids we know now. Closed public schools harmed the most vulnerable children, which was the point I was making from the very beginning, because the rich kids all went to school.
Yeah.
So it was the opposite of what they were saying, but they just hurl these epithets at you, racist, eugenicist, transphobe, whatever, all the things, QAnon, which I didn't even know what that was at the time. I had to look it up. And I used to really try to defend myself. I would try to explain why I wasn't those things. You cannot do that. You cannot engage because it's just a stupid argument that doesn't make any sense. And so now I just sort of laugh at it a little more. But as far as the friends, I mean, part of the problem for me is I was a lefty my whole life, probably. I'm 55 now. So until I was, 51 or 52 years old, I would have identified as left of center. And the left are the biggest cancelers. If you have, I don't know your whole background, but if you always held the views that you hold, then you haven't, violated the tenets of participation in your particular group in the way that I did. I crossed over. I was a loyal lefty. I was a Warren supporter, all these things. And suddenly I was like, wait a minute, I don't really think it's good for the public schools to be closed. And you're just like, a heretic, and you have to go and you have to be punished and banished. And then of course you question everything.
Yeah. Is it, I wonder if it's because of the two of the main, controversial topics that, kind of impacted you on a personal level, because it's like, your relationship with sports and gymnastics and your relationship with having kids and education, where I wonder if it's the case that maybe a lot of people are able to kind of stay in their bubble or in their silos because the stuff doesn't hit them personally.
I think that's possible. I mean, I think like if you look across, this made me feel better when I realized this during COVID. Like if you look across geographies and eras and everything across time, most people will choose to do what they're told and stay with the group, even if they know it's wrong. Mm-hmm. And the incentive to do so, if you are doing that and you get to wrap yourself in virtue, like during COVID, right? Like if you were screaming, stay home, stay safe, and you were at home and you were, burrowed and you're in your apartment and ordering Uber Eats and being able to work and not lose your job and all those things and get to pretend you're really virtuous for screaming at people who wanted their kids to go to school. that, that's even better. But there's so many experiments, right? Like you look at the Milgram experiment and all these things. Like I don't think it's unique. I think it's just a truism that the vast majority of people would rather not think, stay with the group, and have that sort of comfort of the group rather than kind of stand apart and ask questions. And I understand why, because it really sucks, to be ejected and to be called all of these names and to lose your friends and your community. Like, that is not for the faint of heart,
Yeah.
It really isn't. So I understand it, but somehow it helped me when I realized there wasn't really anything unique about COVID. That's just people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. It sort of revealed what we all know about people, just on on a mass scale.
Yeah. Most people would just do nothing. And people always use the comparison to the Holocaust, which obviously is fraught for a million reasons, but they use it because it's sort of one of the most obvious examples of not just a country, but, a continent and the world sort of standing by in the face of incredible evil and doing nothing. Not that I would say that, COVID got to that point at all, but a lot of people just stood by and did nothing. I have a friend who I talked to recently about it, who said, I shared your views, but I wasn't about to stick my neck out. Like, he fully admitted it. He's like, I would just keep my own reputation safe, my job safe, my family safe. Like, why would I do that? I'm just going to wait it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had that experience with producing, where I've had, collaborators say, hey, could, on this video, can you either not, don't put my name, or if you do, can you use like an alias? Because, the possibility of it derailing a career down the, yeah.
What do you say?
I say, okay, that's fine. Okay.
You do? See, yeah. I talked to somebody. One of the things I thought was going to be difficult on XXXY Athletics was getting people to work on it, right? Like, I know the fashion biz. I was like, we're never going to find a designer who's willing to do this. Even if they agree, they'll be afraid to associate with me and this issue. They'll be afraid they never get a job. It's a very, very, New York and LA centric profession, designing.
Right.
And I did, in fact, have one person who said she was willing to work on it, but didn't want her name on it. And I said, God bless you, but then we can't do this. Like, I need people that are willing, and, I can't be worried about keeping it a secret. Like, it's just like, I need people that are all in on this issue. We need to all come together and be all in. And I understand why you don't want it. I have suffered the repercussions of that, but this is probably just not the right gig for you then.
Yeah. And it would be, ultimately would be very awkward if that person's ever found out, and then they have to do a groveling apology. And
I mean, it's sort of different, I guess, in the situation you're describing, because it's one video, like their contract, like they're in and out. Like, I'm talking about working for this company. And if you don't want to put it on your LinkedIn profile, this is not a good fit. Like, if you're too embarrassed or afraid, then it's not the right fit. Yeah,
I ended up having a conversation with one of the people, like, later on, and they were very, I felt for them, like, because actually when I was having the conversation with them, I realized how hurt at the time I was, because I was sort of, does you feel like you're going through something alone? Yeah. And they were very contrite about it, and they described just the reality of the entertainment business, where
I get it, and you need to do what you need to do. I just want people in this that are in it with me, because I think you have to be fully on board and passionate for us to make this work. It's hard to make a startup work. I mean, I don't know what the success rate is, but the hit rate is low, and so I need everybody in it with me, pulling 100%, not ashamed, not embarrassed, because essentially that's what we're asking people to do. So we won't do it, because most surveys show that somewhere between 70 and 80% of Americans agree that women's sports should be for women, which sounds so stupid to have to say.
Yeah.
It's called women's sports. So it doesn't feel like that when you move through the world, that 70 to 80% of people agree with us. So I think our job, or what I would like to do, is coax the people out of the shadows that already agree with us, because then you have this super majority and we can't lose. So I can't have people in the company that are in that silent majority, right? Like I need people in the loud minority to try to kind of bring others into the fold. So, but I like I said, I respect people's choices. This is not easy. It is not fun to lose friends. It is not fun to be, made fun of for your appearance or called a racist or any of it, but you just have to soldier on.
Yeah. And I think things are definitely turning around, or have been turning around for a while. I feel like people are a lot more open now on these subjects and putting themselves out there. And I think even career wise, a lot of people, there are people who are gonna, like you said, on their LinkedIn, it's gonna be like, oh, I'm with XXXY Athletics, and others are gonna see that as a signal, like, oh, I could work with this person on stuff that maybe the majority of people wouldn't be comfortable with.
I think so. I mean, even just having people who work on our team, which is very small, post on LinkedIn something, and then just having 50 people comment or like it is saying it's okay to think this.
Yeah.
It's huge. And like, that's the battle, is getting enough people to come out and say, not only is it okay, I actually agree with you.
Yeah. And because I've been wearing this out. It hasn't sparked a conversation yet. But I think, if a conversation does happen, I'll probably bring up the WNBA, which has been in the media, a lot, especially with, Caitlin Clark, where it's sort of like, here you have all these sports fans who are coming out and saying like the WNBA deserves more recognition, the players deserve more pay. And it's like, well, what does the WNBA, what is it about the WNBA in particular? Yeah. What does the W mean? Yeah. So it's like, understand that when you wear a hat like this, you're defending the foundation of organizations like that.
Yeah. I always use the example, the very worst player in the NBA, and I don't know who that is, and he probably gets no court time, would absolutely crush in the WNBA.
Sure. Yeah. Back
to your point about, mediocre or failed male athletes entering women's spaces. And I'm not saying that's their intention, but my husband and I were talking about last night. I don't know how you feel proud of yourself when you do that. I just don't get it. I really don't. Yeah. But, I don't get how you'd feel proud of yourself if you took a bunch of steroids and cheated and won, or you blood doped and cheated and won. I don't like Lance Armstrong. Like, how would you feel proud of yourself for that?
I don't know. There's only one way to find out. I'm about to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get roided up. I'm going to dope up.
And crush in the WNBA.
Yeah. Oh man, I would. Oh, if there's one guy who would not do well in the WNBA, it's this dude right here. Well, Jen, I want to, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. And I know, your message and, XXXY Athletics is something I think is going to resonate a lot with the people that follow me. And is there any other info, any contact info or anything like that you want to?
No, if you go to thetruthfits.com, that's our little sort of vanity URL for the site, but you can also find it at xx-xyathletics.com. I think you and I are aligned that, art and content and that can sort of move culture forward and can help it more than, politics are downstream from culture. And so that's what I want this brand to do, to help kind of influence, inform, make it okay to say, we agree with you, and right now there aren't any great brands, not just on this subject, but I mean, they're all sort of the activist left, which sounds weird because it's capitalism and it's business, but they're all, that they're owning that tool of culture and smuggling in messages. And so by the time legislation happens, we've already lost the battle because people have already embraced ideas through culture. So I just feel like, using a brand as a tool of culture or introducing a brand, you do it through the content that you create. We need films, we need music, we need all of it to represent more diverse views.
Right on.